Welcome to Golden Bachelor. If you love celebrity news and real entertainment updates, you're in the right place. A quiet goodbye that changed everything. Chock Chapple and Joan Vassos' emotional turning point. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't loud or dramatic. They happen quietly, behind closed doors, away from cameras, in spaces where only two people truly understand what's being lost. For Chock Chapple and Joan Vassos, that moment arrived in a way neither of them had planned. What fans witnessed wasn't shock or chaos, but something far more heartbreaking: acceptance. From the beginning, Chock and Joan's bond felt different. It wasn't rushed or built on surface-level attraction. Instead, their connection grew slowly, rooted in shared experiences, emotional maturity, and a mutual understanding of life's complexities. Viewers saw two people who had both lived full lives, carrying past lessons, personal challenges, and hopes for something meaningful. Their conversations were deep, their moments felt genuine, and that's why fans became so invested. This wasn't just another reality TV pairing, it felt real. But even the strongest connections can face moments when reality intervenes. As time passed, subtle changes became noticeable. The warmth was still there, but so was hesitation. Joan appeared thoughtful, sometimes distant, not out of indifference, but because she was processing something deeply personal. Sources close to the situation suggest that Joan was facing internal questions about timing, readiness, and emotional alignment. Not doubts about Chock as a person, but about whether their paths were truly meant to continue together. And for someone like Joan, who values honesty above all else, ignoring those feelings was never an option. When the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just honesty. Joan spoke carefully, choosing her words with compassion. She acknowledged the connection they shared, the respect she had for Chock, and the meaningful moments they experienced together. But she also admitted that something inside her was holding back, an emotional barrier she couldn't ignore. For Chock, hearing this wasn't easy. Those close to him say he listened quietly, absorbing every word. He didn't interrupt, he didn't argue. Instead, he allowed Joan the space to speak her truth, even though it was painful. That alone says a lot about who he is. Loss doesn't always come from anger or betrayal. Sometimes it comes from understanding. Chock reportedly expressed gratitude for the time they shared. He acknowledged the difficulty of the moment, but respected Joan's honesty. While disappointment was unavoidable, there was also dignity in how he handled it. Fans later noticed how composed he appeared publicly, yet many sensed the emotional weight beneath the surface, the kind of strength that doesn't need to be announced, because real strength often looks like silence. For Joan, saying goodbye wasn't a relief, it was a heavy decision. Walking away from someone who treated her with care and respect wasn't easy, but she understood that continuing without full emotional certainty would only lead to deeper pain later. Her goodbye wasn't about closing a door, it was about being fair to both of them. Those close to Joan say she spent a long time reflecting before making her choice, and even afterward, she carried the weight of knowing she had hurt someone she truly cared about. That's not something anyone takes lightly. As news of their separation spread, fans responded with overwhelming emotion. Some expressed sadness, others disappointment, but many also praised both Chock and Joan for handling the situation with maturity and grace. In a world often driven by drama, their quiet honesty stood out. Social media filled with messages of support. This is what respect looks like. Sometimes love means letting go. Painful,
And
but
perhaps
beautifully
that's why this
handled.
story resonated so deeply, because it felt human. This wasn't a story of failure, it was a story of courage. Courage to speak the truth, courage to listen, courage to walk away with kindness instead of resentment. For Chock, this moment may have been a loss, but it also showed his capacity for empathy and emotional depth. For Joan, it was a reminder that honoring your inner voice, even when it hurts, is an act of self-respect. Their journey may not have ended the way fans hoped, but it ended with integrity. Both Chock and Joan are now moving forward, carrying lessons from their time together. Sometimes people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to teach us something important about ourselves, about love, and about timing. And sometimes the most heartbreaking goodbyes are also the most meaningful. After the conversation ended, there was no dramatic exit, no cameras chasing reactions, just a quiet separation that left both Chock and Joan sitting alone with their thoughts. For Chock, the days that followed felt heavier than he expected. Those close to him noticed a shift, not sadness that demanded attention, but a thoughtful stillness. He continued his routine, stayed busy, and kept his composure. Yet behind that calm exterior was the weight of unanswered what-ifs. What if timing had been different? What if life hadn't pulled them in separate directions? These questions don't come with easy answers. Chock is known among friends as someone who processes emotions internally. Instead of venting publicly, he reflects quietly, replaying conversations, remembering moments, and searching for meaning rather than blame. Sources say he revisited their shared memories, not with regret, but with appreciation. The laughter, the late-night talks, the understanding glances that needed no words. He didn't view their ending as rejection. He viewed it as honesty. And while that didn't erase the pain, it helped him accept it. Meanwhile, Joan was facing her own emotional storm. Ending something meaningful doesn't instantly bring peace. In fact, for her, it brought waves of doubt. She questioned herself repeatedly, wondering if she had been too cautious, too careful, too guarded. But each time those doubts surfaced, she returned to the same truth. She couldn't move forward without emotional certainty. Joan has always believed that staying in a situation out of fear of hurting someone only leads to deeper heartbreak later, and that belief guided her decision, even when it hurt. What made this moment different from so many others was the absence of resentment. Neither Chock nor Joan tried to rewrite the story to protect their image. They didn't shift blame, they didn't hint at hidden
Instead, they let the
drama.
truth stand on its own. And in doing so, they showed fans something rare, what emotional responsibility looks like when feelings are real. Fans didn't connect to the story because it was shocking. They connected because it was relatable. Many people have been in Chock's position, giving their best, believing in something deeply, and still having to let go. Others have been in Joan's place, knowing that staying would be easier than leaving, yet choosing honesty anyway. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a real one. Walking away is often misunderstood as weakness, but in this case, it required strength from both sides. Strength to admit uncertainty, strength to accept disappointment, strength to respect someone else's truth, even when it conflicts with your own hopes. That's why fans continue to talk about this moment, not with anger, but with empathy. As time passed, both Chock and Joan began focusing on their individual paths again. For Chock, this meant rediscovering parts of himself that had taken a back seat, personal goals, friendships, and passions that ground him. For Joan, it meant reconnecting with her inner clarity, reminding herself that listening to her heart is never a mistake. Neither closed themselves off to the idea of love. They simply chose not to force it. Not every meaningful connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach us patience, some teach us courage, and some teach us when to let go with grace. Chock and Joan's story reminds us that love doesn't always end with anger or regret. Sometimes it ends with respect, and that can be just as powerful. And maybe that's why this goodbye didn't feel empty. It felt honest. Even without public statements or dramatic headlines, fans sensed that something meaningful had ended. It wasn't because of what Chock or Joan said, but because of what they didn't say. Sometimes silence carries more emotion than words ever could. Viewers who followed their journey noticed subtle signs: Fewer shared moments, quieter expressions, and a gentler distance that slowly formed. It wasn't coldness. It was two people preparing themselves for an outcome they already felt coming. And that anticipation made the goodbye even heavier. Chock didn't retreat into bitterness. Instead, he leaned into self-control. Those close to him say he focused on staying grounded, taking long walks, keeping his schedule full, and spending time with people who reminded him of who he was before everything became so intense. But late at night, when distractions faded, the emotions returned. He thought about the future he imagined, the shared plans that never fully formed but felt close enough to touch. Letting go of those possibilities was just as painful as letting go of the relationship itself. Because it wasn't just about losing Joan, it was about releasing a version of the future he believed in. Joan's days looked normal on the surface, but emotionally she was still processing everything. She replayed the conversation over and over, not wishing she'd said something different, but feeling the weight of how deeply it affected someone she cared about. Joan is known for her emotional awareness. She understands that being honest doesn't erase guilt, it simply makes it necessary. And yet, despite the sadness, she felt a sense of clarity. Not relief, clarity. The kind that comes from listening to your inner voice instead of silencing it. Some fans wondered if this was just a pause, if time apart might bring them back together. But those close to both Chock and Joan suggest this decision wasn't impulsive. It was thoughtful, carefully considered, and once it was made, it felt final, not because of bitterness, but because of acceptance. Neither wanted to revisit the same emotional uncertainty. They believed that if something needed convincing, it wasn't meant to continue. What makes this story stand out isn't the sadness, it's the maturity. No public arguments, no vague accusations, no attempts to gain sympathy. Instead, there was respect on both sides. That's rare, and it's why many fans now look at this moment not as a collapse, but as an example of how difficult decisions should be handled. The audience reaction shifted over time. At first, there was shock, then sadness, and finally, understanding. Many viewers shared their own experiences, relationships that ended not because of conflict, but because something didn't align deeply enough. And in that way, Chock and Joan's story became a mirror for countless others. It reminded people that love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. This wasn't the end of a dramatic storyline. It was the end of a chapter defined by honesty. For Chock, it symbolized growth, learning that giving your heart fully is never wasted, even if the ending isn't what you hoped for. For Joan, it symbolized self-trust, choosing clarity over comfort, even when the choice is painful. And for fans, it symbolized something rare in today's world, a goodbye that didn't destroy respect. Long after the moment passed, the impact remained, because not all meaningful stories end with permanence. Some end with understanding. And sometimes, the bravest thing two people can do is walk away, not as enemies, but as individuals who shared something real, even if it couldn't last. Thanks for watching Golden Bachelor. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next big story.